So you may be wondering, how in the world did medieval peasants work less than we do now? After all, most people, when they think of a peasant, they think of a dirty and poor person busting their ass to barely survive. In a certain sense, that is partially true. Obviously, sanitation was not really a thing, and yes, most peasants were poor and at times worked hard in the fields, depending on what the agenda for the day was. But the difference between people who say they worked harder and longer and those who disagree is what their perception of work is. Peasants had a lot of time and freedom of choice. They worked the land to provide food and pay rent to the lord of the land, which, of course, is where the word landlord comes from.
So if serfs are tied to the land and they're paying rent to landlords, what is a landlord? The hint is kind of in the name. The lord is the pejorative here. So a lot of people who are landlords come from the nobility and noble houses.
They wove their own clothes, spun their own cloth, and in general were mostly self-sufficient. They got to choose what they wanted to do, they got to choose how much time they spent, they got to choose how hard they worked. They took very frequent breaks, and they took it easy as much as possible. You know, you can't go up to your manager and say, "Hey boss, I'm gonna relax for a bit, I'm kind of tired, but I'll get that truck unloaded when I'm ready," or "I'll push those carts when the sun goes down and it's not so hot." Abso-fucking-lutely not. Why? Because of how our economy and society is structured today. The thirst for profits, the ass-kissing of customers at the expense of your dignity and respect, and the general pace of life. You know, fast, 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 go, go, go! No, you can't take a break, this customer wants his product now! The capitalistic system has produced a soul-crushing, depressing, and to a certain extent, a slave-like dynamic. I'm not completely against capitalism, but it would be intellectually dishonest to say it certainly doesn't have its many problems. Essentially, when you are doing what you want on your own time for you, it doesn't really feel like work, right? You understand? Basically, the amount of time you had to dedicate your one obligation to pay rent was drastically less than what we have to do today. This is part of the reason why mental health is so drastically declining in modern times. You just get sick of spending most of your free time making shit wages just to try to barely survive.
As we'll see, tensions like this eventually reach a boiling point. Peasants get really tired with their specific lot in life and the idea that they should simply be paying for everything around them with their own sweat.
So what exactly are the numbers? How many days did peasants have to work in order to just survive? Well, a typical analysis I've seen many times is it's about 150 days out of the year of work for them. Then here's a snip from an article on Inc.com. 150 days seems like a pretty small number compared to a whopping average of 267 days now. But they calculate this using pretty much every little thing peasants did, like cooking and cleaning. If we remove that from the equation, the number of days is probably a lot less, because those are just general things that you do anyway for yourself. You know, you need to cook your food, do all these things. These are just general, household activities, so it shouldn't even be in the equation. And of course, we see the typical, oh, they worked less, but they died young, they had bad teeth, and no plumbing or iPhones kind of garbage. But that's not the point. I don't think anyone disagrees that the quality of life was not very good. And I'm not saying peasants had it better off than we do. No, the whole point is that they fucking worked way less than we do today. Even with our fancy technology, most people are still wage slaves.
Time was also perceived much differently back then. There were no artificial units such as hours or minutes, but it was tied much closer to natural cycles. The idea of saving time or being punctual just wasn't as much of a concept then. Medieval peasants also had a lot more holidays than we do today. The medieval English had approximately 1/3 of the year off in holidays, while the Ancien Regime in France could boast 52 Sundays, 90 rest days, and 38 additional holidays. In Spain, it was even more, with holidays totaling as much as 5 months of the year. The first public clocks were used in the 14th century in textile centers across Europe, and the workers hated them, even going so far as to stage uprisings against them. Unlike the sun, employers could now use these as a means of regimenting their workers' hours. Needless to say, from there on out, working hours slowly but surely started to get longer and longer, with the effects really being felt by the 18th century. And when artificial lighting became a thing, not even the nighttime was off limits. Of course, let's not forget about the invention of the bedside alarm clock, which totally screwed things for those of us who are not morning people. Thanks, technology. On top of that, with the growth of national and international markets, competition and profit motive came to define economies more and more, resulting in, as historian E.P. Thompson puts it, time becoming a currency that we spend instead of something that we pass. This is by no means to suggest that their lives were better or easier. There's something to be said for indoor plumbing and air conditioning, so take it for what you will. At the very least, it'll give you something to talk about Monday morning when you're staring down the barrel of a 40-hour work week.
So when people say peasants worked a lot more, that they worked from sun up to sundown, number one, that is not always true. And number two, throughout the entire day, they take lots of breaks. They rest, relax, and generally take things pretty easy. In contrast to now, when you're working an average of 8 hours, on average 8 hours a day, most of that time is actually spent working. You may get a 30-minute or an hour lunch, maybe a 15-30-minute break, but that's about it. And I'm only speaking to the American work life. Your laws and regulations are probably different, but they might be similar in different countries. So there we have it. Peasants worked less, had more leisure time, and in general took things easier than we do. We may have all these fancy benefits of living in a modern age, but what's the point of all that shit if we are still overworked, underpaid, depressed, and unhealthy? At least to me, the most important thing is your happiness and the state of your mental health. If I had a piece of land where I can work on my own terms, make my own decisions on my own time, I think that is more desirable outcome than a life of wage slavery. Now, obviously, this brings up tons and tons of, other questions, more details of exactly the system, how it works, how we can overcome it or make it better, and all these kinds of things. Those are probably going to be videos way down the road. But the point is, this video, we work way more and way harder than a medieval peasant.